Howdy guys, I'm AutoEdits Jason, and this video is going to be a comparison between the two Jeeps you see here. On my right is the AutoEdits Jeep, a 2013 four-door Rubicon, and that build is documented right here on the channel in great detail, but we'll hit some of the highlights, versus Joe's Jeep. Now this one started out life as a 2016 Willys four-door, and we've now done a few videos on that here on the channel where we've done 1-ton swap, new suspension, a bunch of stuff has been done to this thing. Now, these Jeeps both share a lot of parts in common, but they are so vastly different. And someone had, a viewer had a great suggestion to compare the two, especially since we have the Dynatrac Dana 60s underneath this thing, and then a Dana Spicer Ultimate Dana 44 in the front of this thing, just to see those things side by side. Now, while we're running through some of the comparisons on these things, it's really kind of gives me a moment to show you guys the waterfall effect of how doing certain upgrades on a Jeep like this project right here turned into this avalanche or waterfall of other things and other systems that are affected that you have to upgrade. So it just kind of was one of those things that it kept catching you like, oh geez, we just did this. Okay, now we got to do this. Okay, then we got to do this. So this Jeep was a really good lesson on that because it all just happened right away. Whereas this one I've been working on for a few years, go wheel it. This one was a bunch of parts showed up. It was like, oh crap, I can't get this done until I do these other things. So this will be kind of fun. Now, both of these Jeeps are sitting on the exact same suspension, which is kind of a cool and unique thing, given how different they are otherwise. They both are running the MetalCloak long arm, lock and load, 4.5-inch lift suspension and springs, and I love it. They both drive amazing and in uniquely different ways I'll talk about in a minute. But what I'm running is the Milestar 38-inch Patagonias. Joe chose the Milestar 37-inch Patagonias, and he had a couple different reasons for that. Now, he wants his Jeep to fit in his garage at his house, and he's right on the ragged edge as it was, and so this will keep his Jeep in his garage. Plus, what he wants to do and what he's building this thing for, and that's kind of the beauty of how personalized these things can be, is that he wants this thing just to be an absolute tank that he could take his family on any Jeep Jamboree at any state in the country, drive there, beat the snot out of this thing, and drive home with confidence and not have to worry about things. And it's great that he has the ability to build a Jeep to do that. I think that's amazing. Now, the opposite ethos I'm doing here is I have some lightweight parts. I have a Jeep that's a little bit more nimble. It's much lighter than his Jeep. I mean, we've added 1,000 pounds worth of axles to his. He literally has just a tank that he can just huck this thing, not worry about being, precise, putting tires in the right spots. Like for me, I have to consider that. Now I went with the Ultimate Dana 44, thinking I wanted to keep the front end a little bit lighter, keep the Jeep feeling a little bit better. Well, after test driving Joe's Jeep, I have unfortunately and fortunately found that this thing drives amazing. So whatever the Dynatrac steering and the hubs and the things that they've done up here, it's pretty remarkable. This Jeep drives and feels great in this canyon roads. I even learned a lot in putting the PSC hydraulic ram assist steering kit on this thing. Now that's the starting of one of those things that the avalanche effect. The stock steering box was fine driving around town, but as soon as you would get it up into a little bit of a bind, you couldn't turn it. It's worse than whatever I've dealt with and what we've dealt with our stock steering, especially because of how much more effort it just takes to turn the wheels. So I would say it's mandatory if you're going to do a 1-ton axle in the front of your Jeep, you're going to have to put a hydraulic ram assist up there. So you just incur these much bigger expenses. Like that's the other part of it. So boom, big axles. Okay, that means you're gonna have to obviously upgrade your suspension, obviously then drivetrain, and then brakes. So let me bring you in and show you a couple of the components on the PSC steering kit that I just installed. Now I did a bunch of miles on this thing first, but before I put that in, just seeing if like that was a mandatory thing. And yeah, it turned out that is absolutely something that was mandatory. I couldn't wheel this thing without that. Like I say, the steering felt fine around town and in parking lots, but as soon as you actually had some force against the wheel, it was impossible. Now, in going with the PSC hydraulic kit, you incur not just the expense of doing that kit. Now, he went with the full kit, which is really, really nice. It has a lot of good components. It has this really big, cool aluminum cooler I mounted down here underneath the radiator. It has this billet aluminum reservoir that rides right here, a breather and catch valve, a new pump, and then the heavy-duty HD steering gearbox that mounts up in there. So if you can just imagine changing all those systems, it's a big job. And here's the thing, now that I've been driving this thing with the PSC, that's one of the reasons why I didn't do a Dyna60 in the front of mine. I was like, oh, it's gonna make it feel too numb. And yeah, you do miss a little bit of that on-center feel of the steering, but it doesn't interrupt or intrude in the steering as much as I thought. It's actually still quite a nimble, fun little thing to drive. And that's the thing that's been blowing my mind about this thing. The combination between this suspension and the adjustable Belltech shocks that I have on here, it's wild how good this thing drives. Down the highway, it will go whatever speed you want to go. It's plush, and then go off. And I haven't really done a ton of off-roading yet. I just did my creek bed with it that I took the Jeep on and did my shakedown run on it. It's time to get this back into Joe's hands so he could do all the dial-in and stuff. So I was pleasantly surprised, like extraordinarily surprised with how good this feels. It kind of changed, made me double second guess. Yeah, I have 600 pounds less on the front of my Jeep than the Dyna60, but boy, that peace of mind, you wrestle with that, and the cost, obviously. So you have to think about all of those things. But one of the other things, ripple effect, is that once you put all the PSC stuff in here, you don't really have room for the stock air box. You'd have to do some serious modifications to that. So we ended up going with the Banks cold air intake, which is a really cool looking unit. It does actually feel a little bit of, on the butt dyno, a little bit of improvement in performance. And all I had to do was just trim a little bit at the bottom of that to fit the hoses at the bottom of the steering reservoir here, and boom, there you go. And it looks really trick, so it's pretty cool. Here's one of those fun moments where I learned about a product that at first I literally bad-mouthed it in the first video because I just had ignorance to what exactly I was dealing with here, and it wasn't set up quite right. So the sway lock sway bar, love it. The Jeep drives fantastic with that thing. I don't have a rear sway bar on this thing. I think if you guys go watch that video, I explain in that video why I don't. Because I thought this front one was so stiff, and it is, but it is in a good way. It offers the exact right amount of body roll. The thing still feels very sporty but comfortable. And then you just go inside. He's got Joe's got a little air compressor, ARB twin air compressor to air up, and that runs this sway bar. So you just go inside, hit a button, and it just goes click and unlocked. It's actually quite a cool little unit. I lubed it, set it up right. Man, the thing's cool. And so there you go. I learned, and I like it a lot. All right, so let's talk about width of the Jeeps. Now you have a Jeep here on tons and mine on a Dana Ultimate 44. And what I learned during the Joe's Jeep build, that somebody told me, made sure to let me know that this particular axle is what's considered a full width axle, which is a few inches wider than JK stock Dana 44. So there's some cool data in there. In Joe's Jeep build, I do all the rundown of that stuff. But here's the specs of what we have right now. Now remember, these change because of wheel spacers, wheel offset. Now these Hutchinson Rock Monster wheels, I really, really like those. I did a standout video of those, of mounting those things up, because they're just so pleasant to mount and they're so strong and have so much confidence. But they have a very conservative backspace, so they sit somewhat inside the wheel well. And even my Vision beadlocks here they only have a 4.5-inch backspace, which isn't really aggressive. I actually ended up having to run 1.5-inch spacers on here. Well, mostly because I had 1.5-inch spacers from way back when, just because I actually needed only a 1/2-inch space to clear the rear sway bar link on this thing. When I went up to 4.5 inches, everything got a little bit tight back there, and the sway bar link happened right at the tire, and it was just close enough to where I put what I had. I didn't have to buy them, so it's a little wide. So here's the specs as they sit right here. Joe's Jeep, outer wheel to outer wheel, is 80 inches wide, AutoEdits Jeep, 83 inches wide. And that's, again, because there's a few other things involved. But here's a inner factor that you can kind of take into account. Both of these things, so inner disc brake to inner disc brake, I measured those, 61 inches here, 61, just slightly under 61 inches here, disc brake to disc brake, to give you a sense of what the actual width is. So maybe one of you guys can explain that to me. So not that much bigger width-wise than what I have going on here. 1 tons and this wheel setup, a little bit narrower than the JK here. So kind of gives you that frame of reference. Not that big a difference width-wise, but what I did notice is that because the housing is so much bigger and takes up so much more space, you do lose some of your up travel. You do lose room. Like the front, he had a Smitty built skid plate up here. Not gonna work up here. You're gonna have to do some modifications and figure something else out, and that's what's next. He's actually going to MetalCloak to get the skid plates fitted on this thing. All right, so the other measurement that was really important to Joe when we were building this thing is that it has to fit in his garage, which is a traditional style garage like that. And at the top of the Super Top Ultra on his Jeep, he is 80 inches tall. The garage is 81 inches, so it literally just barely fits, but it does. Now my Jeep with the 38 Patagonias is 83 inches. It will not fit in there without letting all of the air out of the tires. So that's one of those things you just have to keep in mind. But boom, did it, bullseye. This Jeep does fit and is a tank. One of the other components I kind of turned my nose up at the beginning were the TerraFlex speed bumps, just because I don't know a lot. I don't really want that in my build, but you know what? I ended up finding out they were really actually great. They don't feel weird at all. The one thing you have to get used to is that you hear them. So as the suspension, the bump stops come up and just touch that, you'll hear that, and you just have to build that into your calibration of what the vehicle's doing. Mine doesn't make any noise at all during the suspension travel. So this, you'll just hear a little clunk as the bump stop comes up and meets the speed bump, the little piston there, and then you don't hear it at all. And they actually, it feels great. Okay, I gotta say, you know, I haven't really beat on it or driven it hard. I took it up the creek bed and, you know, kind of leaned on it a little bit, and they are comfy, you know, they are very comfy. So, you know, I didn't jump it or anything, but it does take there's zero harshness out of this thing, and especially with a giant axle like that under there. So they ended up being pretty cool. Just got to get used to the difference of what they feel like. I used to have some pretty gnarly air bumps on the truck, and they used to drive me nuts because you just, every little bump you hear it clunk, and then it was just the bump stop hitting. So get used to that. They are pretty great. There you have it. Relatively quick bullet point comparison between two similar but vastly different builds on these two Jeeps. I got some really good ideas on some things I want to apply to my Jeep from learning and touching the parts on Joe's Jeep. Well, that sounds weird, but you know, I think definitely going to do a steering upgrade on the AutoEdits Jeep. I'll probably be looking at the PSC Overland kit. Not sure I'm going to need to go the hydraulic assist all the way. You know, it's one of those great fun, like, oh, let's think about the best application and the direction I've already headed here. So there you have it. Two fun Jeeps. This one goes back up to Joe here soon. Stay tuned for that video and road trip. And then we take this thing off-road for real. I still haven't even got a chance to do all of the hardcore testing and the test and tune on this thing yet. I've been just working on this thing and trying to survive. So hopefully you guys are doing well as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, enjoy your drive. All right, we're gonna plan a trip up north.